Stop! It's poison! The barefoot black boy's scream shattered the crystal perfection of Le Jardin restaurant as he lunged at billionaire Richard Blackstone's wine glass, sending the $500, 000 vintage crashing to the marble floor. Security guards slammed the 12-year-old face first into the ground, knee crushing his spine, blood pooling beneath his broken nose while 50 wealthy diners watched in disgust. "Get this filthy homeless trash out of here!" The manager roared, not knowing the child had just saved the most powerful man in pharmaceutical history from cyanide poisoning that would have killed him in 15 minutes. Have you ever witnessed a child being brutalized for trying to save a life? This isn't just about racial prejudice, it's about the price of truth when power refuses to listen. Marcus Thompson existed in the shadows between Manhattan's glittering towers and its forgotten alleys, a 12-year-old ghost haunting the spaces where wealth and poverty intersected but never touched. His 70-pound frame carried the architecture of chronic hunger ribs, visible through dark skin like prison bars, shoulder blades sharp as broken wings, a spine that looked like a string of prayer beads beneath his torn t-shirt. The scar running down his left cheek had never properly healed after his stepfather's bottle opened it 4 years ago, leaving a raised ridge that made other children stare and adults look away. He shared a cardboard shelter beneath the 142nd Street overpass with his grandmother Eleanor, whose mind had been stolen by Alzheimer's so thoroughly that she often forgot Marcus existed, calling him by names of relatives long dead, or staring through him as if he were made of morning mist. Each day began at 4 o'clock when the city's heartbeat was slowest, and Marcus would crawl from beneath their blue tarp to begin his rounds. His fingers, already arthritic from winter cold despite his young age, sorted through dumpsters with scientific precision aluminum cans in one bag, glass bottles in another, each worth 5 cents toward their survival. By 7, he'd wash his face and armpits in a McDonald's bathroom, using the pink soap that left his skin feeling stripped and raw, then slip through the back entrance of PS 108, where teachers had long stopped asking why he wore the same clothes every day, or why he hoarded cafeteria leftovers in his backpack like a squirrel preparing for winter. What nobody knew, not his teachers who pitied him, not the social workers who'd given up on him, not the other homeless who shared his alley, was that Marcus Thompson possessed an IQ of 165, discovered accidentally when a substitute teacher found him solving differential equations on napkins during lunch, equations he'd taught himself from a calculus textbook he'd found in a university dumpster. The boy had memorized entire medical encyclopedias discarded by the library, teaching himself to identify diseases by their symptoms, medications by their molecular structures, and most remarkably, poisons by their distinctive odors. 3 times in the past year alone, he'd saved lives in the homeless camps, recognizing botulism in donated canned goods that smelled slightly off, identifying methanol poisoning in bootleg liquor someone was passing around, spotting carbon monoxide exposure in a family sleeping too close to a generator during a cold snap. He never took credit, never sought recognition. Heroes didn't need applause. His mother had taught him before she died. Sarah Thompson had been 28 years old when she died, though the diabetes had aged her so much she looked 40. She'd gotten pregnant with Marcus at 16, and everyone, her parents, her teachers, the counselor at the clinic, had told her to give him up for adoption. But she'd held him that first time, seen her own eyes looking back at her, and declared him her miracle. She'd worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat, mopping floors at the Marriott from midnight to 8, washing dishes at a diner from 9 to 5, cleaning offices from 6 to 11. 20 hours a day of labor, her hands permanently pruned from water and chemicals, her back curved from constant bending, all so Marcus could have clothes without holes, food without mold, a chance at something better than what she'd gotten. The diabetes diagnosis had come when Marcus was 5. Type 1, the kind that wasn't anyone's fault, just genetic bad luck in a world where bad luck could kill you if you were poor. The insulin had been expensive but manageable at first, $50 per vial, and she needed 3 vials a month. She could afford it if she was careful, if she skipped her own meals, if she worked holidays and weekends. Then Blackstone Pharmaceutical had bought the patent. Richard Blackstone represented everything that had murdered Marcus's mother, though the man himself would have laughed at such dramatic phrasing. At 62, he commanded a pharmaceutical empire worth $50 billion, built on the simple premise that sick people would pay anything to stay alive, and if they couldn't pay, well, that was just natural selection working as intended. His morning routine began at 5 with a workout in his private gym, where a personal trainer who cost more per hour than most people made per day pushed him through exercises designed to extend his life while he shortened others. Breakfast was prepared by a Michelin-starred chef who'd been poached from a famous restaurant, the eggs from chickens that lived better than Marcus did, the coffee from beans that cost more per pound than Sarah Thompson had made per hour. Blackstone had been married 3 times, each wife younger than the last, each divorce more expensive than most people's entire lives. His children, 2 sons and a daughter, had learned early that their father's love was transactional, doled out based on their willingness to embrace his philosophy that weakness was a choice and poverty was a character flaw. They took their trust funds and stayed away, sending cards on holidays but never visiting, knowing that their inheritance was blood money but taking it anyway because principles were easier to maintain when you weren't hungry. Tonight's dinner at Le Jardin celebrated his latest victory, crushing a federal antitrust lawsuit through a combination of legal brilliance, strategic donations to the right political campaigns, and a $10 million bribe to a judge who'd needed money for his own daughter's cancer treatment. The irony of that last part was lost on Blackstone. Or perhaps it wasn't. Perhaps he enjoyed it, the way some people enjoyed watching ants burn under a magnifying glass. The wine he'd ordered cost more than a house in most parts of America, a 1,787 Chateau Margaux that had supposedly belonged to Thomas Jefferson, though the provenance was as questionable as Blackstone's ethics. Marcus had been standing outside the restaurant since 6 that evening, his stomach cramping from 2 days without solid food. The afternoon rain had soaked through his clothes, leaving him shivering despite the warm evening, his body no longer able to regulate temperature properly from chronic malnutrition. He pressed his face against the cold glass, watching the golden world inside where a single bread roll cost more than he'd eaten in a week, where people left more food on their plates than he'd see in a month, where wine was spilled carelessly on tablecloths that cost more than his mother's monthly insulin had. That's when Blackstone noticed him, this small, dark stain on his perfect evening, this reminder that poverty existed outside the climate-controlled bubble of his success. The billionaire's face contorted with the kind of disgust usually reserved for stepping in dog feces, his mouth twisting as if he could taste something rotten. He summoned security with a finger snap that conveyed more contempt than most people could manage with a stream of profanity, the gesture saying everything about how he viewed the child not as human but as debris to be cleared. "Remove that creature," Blackstone commanded, his voice carrying through the glass with the authority of someone who'd never been told no. "This establishment has standards, and that thing is lowering property values just by existing near it." The security guard, Trevor Walsh, had been fired from the NYPD 3 years ago for excessive force that had left a teenager paralyzed, though the official record said he'd resigned for personal reasons. He grabbed Marcus by his torn collar, fingers digging into the boy's neck hard enough to leave bruises. "You heard Mr. Blackstone, monkey. Time to swing back to whatever tree you fell from." Marcus didn't resist as Trevor dragged him away from the window. He'd learned through painful experience that resistance only made the beatings worse, that dignity was a luxury the poor couldn't afford, that sometimes survival meant accepting humiliation as the price of existence. But as Trevor pulled him past the service entrance, a familiar scent stopped him cold. The distinctive bitter almond smell that his chemistry books had taught him meant only one thing: the smell that had saved 3 lives in the past year, the smell that meant someone was about to die. Cyanide. The smell was coming from inside the restaurant, specifically from the direction of Blackstone's table, carried on the air current created by the opening service door. Marcus's mind raced through the possibilities with the kind of rapid analysis that his teachers would have marveled at if they'd known he was capable of it. Someone on the staff, someone with access to that incredibly expensive wine, had poisoned Blackstone's drink. The bitter almond scent was unmistakable to anyone who'd studied chemistry, though most people would miss it among the restaurant's complex bouquet of garlic, butter, and perfume. In 15 minutes, maybe less if Blackstone drank deeply, the billionaire would be dead, his central nervous system shutting down as the cyanide prevented his cells from using oxygen. The man who'd killed his mother was about to die, and all Marcus had to do was nothing. He thought of his mother's final days, how she'd tried to hide her deterioration from him, pretending the sweating was from the heat when their apartment had no heating, claiming the weight loss was from a new diet when they both knew they couldn't afford enough food for diets. She'd gone into a coma on a Tuesday morning while getting ready for her first job, collapsing in their bathroom with her uniform half on, her body finally unable to function without the insulin it needed. Marcus had called 911, had begged the paramedics to help, had followed the ambulance on foot for 12 blocks until his legs gave out. They'd stabilized her at the emergency room, the legal minimum required, then discharged her when they found out she had no insurance. She died that night in their apartment, holding Marcus's hand, apologizing for leaving him alone, making him promise to be better than the world that had killed her. "Don't become a monster to fight monsters, baby," she'd whispered, her voice already fading. "Become an angel. That's how we win, not by being stronger or richer or meaner, but by being better. Promise me you'll be better." Marcus stood there in the alley beside Le Jardin, rain starting again, washing the city's grime into rivers that ran toward drains like urban arteries. Through the service door, he could hear Blackstone's voice, loud with wine and victory. "Gentlemen, tonight we celebrate the future of American medicine, one where profit margins aren't constrained by bleeding heart liberals who think healthcare is a human right. Healthcare is a product, like any other. If you can't afford it, you don't deserve it. That's not cruelty. That's capitalism working as intended." The other men laughed, their voices a chorus of agreement. Marcus heard glasses clinking, saw through the window as Blackstone raised his poisoned wine toward his lips. The burgundy liquid caught the chandelier light, looking like blood, looking like the diabetic ulcers that had covered his mother's legs in her final months, looking like every injustice that had ever been swallowed by those too poor to spit it back out. All Marcus had to do was nothing. In 10 minutes, Blackstone would be gasping for air. In 15, he'd be dead. In 20, the paramedics would be covering his body with a sheet, and the news would report that the pharmaceutical titan had died of natural causes after all. Who would suspect murder at such an upscale establishment? James Chen, Blackstone's biggest competitor, would buy the company in the chaos that followed. Insulin prices might go down. Lives might be saved. Justice might finally be served, cold as the revenge it represented. But Marcus heard his mother's voice again, clear as if she stood beside him in the rain. "We don't become monsters to fight monsters." His feet moved before his mind fully decided. He burst through the service door, dodging a waiter carrying a tray of soup that went flying, creating a cream-colored explosion across the floor. The distance to Blackstone's table seemed both infinite and instantaneous infinite, because every step was a choice to save someone who didn't deserve saving. Instantaneous, because Marcus moved with the desperation of someone who knew that choosing humanity over hatred was the only way to honor the dead. Diners screamed as this filthy child invaded their sanctuary. Women clutched their purses, assuming this was a robbery. Men stood up, ready to be heroes against what they saw as an obvious threat. Marcus weaved between them like water finding its way through rocks, his small size finally an advantage. "Security!" someone shouted. "Call the police," another voice added. "Don't let him near the kitchen, he might contaminate the food." Marcus reached Blackstone's table just as the billionaire was bringing the glass to his lips for a toast. The boy's hand shot out, connecting with the crystal, sending it flying in an arc that seemed to happen in slow motion. The wine spread across the white tablecloth like a blood stain, like evidence of a crime that had almost been committed. "It's poison!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with puberty and desperation. "Cyanide! I can smell it! Don't drink anything!" For a moment, the restaurant froze a tableau of shock painted in expressions of disbelief and disgust. Then Blackstone's face twisted with rage that transformed his dignified features into something primitive and ugly. His manicured hand, wearing a watch worth more than most people's homes, swung through the air and connected with Marcus's face with a crack that echoed through the sudden silence. Marcus crashed to the floor, his cheek splitting along the old scar, blood immediately beginning to flow. The copper taste filled his mouth, familiar as poverty, sharp as the knowledge that being right didn't matter if you were the wrong color, the wrong class, the wrong everything. "You little animal," Blackstone roared, standing over Marcus with the kind of fury that came from interrupted privilege. "That wine was worth more than your entire worthless existence. Do you have any idea what you've just destroyed?" 3 security guards materialized as if summoned by the sheer force of Blackstone's rage. Trevor led them, his face bright with the excitement of sanctioned violence. They pinned Marcus to the floor with practiced efficiency, Trevor's knee grinding into the boy's spine while another guard twisted his thin arms behind his back. Marcus felt his nose break against the marble, blood flowing freely now, mixing with the spilled wine in a pattern that looked like abstract art or maybe a prophecy. "Please," Marcus gasped through the blood filling his mouth. "Test it. Test the wine. Cyanide smells like bitter almonds. I know chemistry. I've studied it. Please, just test it." "Shut your lying mouth," Trevor pressed harder, feeling ribs bend beneath his weight, enjoying the way the boy's body tried and failed to draw breath. Probably high on crack, seeing things that aren't there. These people, they'll say anything for attention. The restaurant patrons had formed a circle now, their phones out, recording the spectacle with the detached fascination of people watching a nature documentary. Marcus could hear their comments like drops of acid on his consciousness. Probably trying to rob the place. They start young these days. The audacity, coming into an establishment like this. "Look at him bleeding on the marble. Who's going to clean that up?" This is what happens when we don't enforce vagrancy laws. Someone should check if anything's missing from the coat room. Antoine Dubois, Lejardin's manager, pushed through the crowd with the controlled fury of someone whose entire career depended on handling situations like this without disturbing the ambiance. His French accent made his disgust sound almost elegant, like contempt dressed in silk. "Messieurs, mesdames, I sincerely apologize for this intrusion. We will have this creature removed immediately, and of course, your meals tonight will be complimentary for those affected by this disturbance." He kicked Marcus in the ribs, just hard enough to make his point without seeming uncivilized to his clientele. The boy's body curled involuntarily, trying to protect itself from further damage. "You dare contaminate my restaurant?" Another kick, this one to the kidney. "You dare disturb my guests?" A third to the stomach. "Trevor, call the police immediately. We're pressing full charges, trespassing, assault, destruction of property, attempted robbery, and whatever else we can think of." Marcus tried to speak, but Trevor's hand covered his mouth, fingers pinching his nose shut, cutting off his air. The boy's eyes, wide with desperation and beginning to show the telltale panic of oxygen deprivation, found Blackstone. The billionaire was examining his ruined suit, calculating the cleaning costs, perhaps considering whether to bill the boy's family before remembering that people like this didn't have families worth billing. "Mr. Blackstone," Antoine continued, his voice oozing the particular kind of servility that expensive restaurants perfected, "please, allow us to comp your entire evening. We'll have a new bottle brought immediately, perhaps the 1945 Romani Conti. I've been saving it for only the most distinguished guests." "No," Marcus bit Trevor's hand, earning a punch to his kidney but managing to scream. "Don't let him drink anything. Someone paid off your sommelier. Check his locker, there'll be money. James Chen wants him dead. Please, somebody listen to me." Blackstone laughed, a sound like ice cracking on a frozen lake. "Listen to it, making up stories. What's next? Aliens? Government conspiracies? This is what happens when we let them breed without supervision. They create fantasy worlds to explain their failures." The crowd laughed with him, the sound washing over Marcus like sewage, like every moment of dismissal he'd experienced in his short life compounded into one symphony of contempt. He could still smell the cyanide, stronger now that the wine had spread across the floor. The bitter almond scent was unmistakable to anyone who'd studied chemistry, but these people had studied only comfort, had learned only the science of maintaining their distance from suffering. "I saved you," Marcus whispered, but no one was listening anymore. They'd already written the story in their minds: crazy homeless child attacks, respectable businessman, probably looking for drug money, definitely dangerous, certainly deserving whatever happened next. The police arrived in minutes, their response time remarkably fast for a crime that actually needed preventing. 2 officers, both white, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else, but also like they'd handled this exact situation 100 times before. Officer Bradley looked at the scene, the bleeding black child, the angry white diners, the expensive destruction, and immediately understood the narrative. "Marcus Thompson," the boy said when asked his name, his voice steady despite the blood still flowing from his nose. "I'm 12 years old. I go to PS 108. I was trying to save Mr. Blackstone's life. The wine has cyanide in it. Please, you have field tests for drugs, test for poison. It'll turn blue if there's cyanide. Please, I'm begging you." "Save it for the judge," Bradley replied, hauling Marcus to his feet with unnecessary force. The handcuffs were designed for adults. They hung loose on his thin wrists but still managed to cut into his skin when Bradley tightened them out of habit or cruelty or both. "You're looking at serious time, kid. Assault, trespassing, destruction of property worth more than you'll see in your lifetime. As they dragged him toward the door, Marcus made one last attempt, his voice carrying the kind of desperate truth that should have made everyone stop and listen. 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, check your sommelier. Check the wine. Someone will die if you don't listen. I know what cyanide smells like. I've saved 3 people from poisoning. Please, I'm not crazy. I'm not on drugs. I'm trying to help. The restaurant erupted in fresh laughter. Blackstone raised a new glass of wine champagne this time, brought quickly by the apologetic staff. To natural selection, he toasted, staring directly at Marcus with eyes that held no mercy, no doubt, no recognition that the boy might be telling the truth, and to knowing one's place in the food chain. That's when Dr. Harrison Mitchell stood up. The Columbia University chemistry professor had been dining with his wife, celebrating their 30th anniversary with expensive food that tasted like cardboard in his mouth as their marriage crumbled in silence. He'd heard the boy mention cyanide, heard him describe the bitter almond smell with the kind of specific detail that didn't come from movies or fantasy but from actual knowledge. While everyone else watched the police drag Marcus away, Harrison knelt beside the spilled wine, his scientific curiosity overriding social propriety. The smell hit him immediately unmistakable, undeniable, deadly. Jesus Christ, he breathed, his face draining of color as the implications crashed over him. He pulled out his phone's flashlight, illuminating the puddle of wine. There was an almost imperceptible oily sheen on the surface, wrong for a vintage burgundy, right for a solution containing dissolved cyanide salt. His hands shaking, he reached into his jacket pocket for the small field testing kit he always carried, a quirk his wife mocked him for, calling it paranoid, not knowing it was about to save lives. "Stop!" Harrison's voice cracked like a whip across the restaurant, carrying the authority of someone who dealt in facts rather than opinions. Nobody drink anything. Nobody touch anything. That boy was right. This is cyanide. I can smell it now that I'm close. I'm a chemistry professor at Columbia. This wine has been poisoned. The champagne glass slipped from Blackstone's fingers, shattering on the floor in an echo of the earlier destruction. Harrison's test strip turned deep blue the moment it touched the wine. The color changed so dramatic it was visible from across the room. Call poison control. Call the CDC. Call everyone. This wine has enough potassium cyanide to kill 3 people, maybe more, if anyone had drunk this. The restaurant transformed from mockery to chaos in the space of a heartbeat. Diners stumbled away from their tables, suddenly afraid that their own drinks might be poisoned. Antoine's face cycled through confusion, fear, and finally horror as the implications hit him. Someone on his staff had tried to commit murder in his restaurant. The boy, someone whispered, and then louder, the boy saved him. That child saved Blackstone's life. Bradley and his partner had stopped at the door, Marcus suspended between them like laundry on a line. Slowly, as if in a dream, Bradley unlocked the handcuffs. They clattered to the marble floor with a sound like Judgment Day. Marcus stood there, blood still dripping from his nose, his small body swaying but somehow dignified. He looked at Blackstone, who had collapsed into his chair, face gray with shock and something else, perhaps the first stirrings of shame, though it would take more than this moment to fully germinate. "You have about 10 minutes to find who did this," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "Check your sommelier first. Derek, I think his name is. I've seen him before when I've stood outside. Then check James Chen's financial records. Someone paid a lot of money to kill you tonight, Mr. Blackstone. The kind of money that leaves traces. The sommelier Derek Bryant, 23 years old, drowning in student loans, working at Le Jardin for the tips that might someday pay off his debts tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Trevor, seeking redemption for his earlier violence against Marcus, tackled him to the ground with all the excessive force he'd learned in the NYPD. The police found $100,000 in cash in Derek's locker, wrapped in plastic like the dirty secret it was, along with a burner phone containing texts from James Chen that laid out the entire plan in damning detail. "How?" Blackstone's voice was barely a whisper. All his earlier authority evaporated like the wine on the floor. He stood facing Marcus, this titan of industry suddenly looking every one of his 62 years, perhaps more. "How did you know? How could you possibly know?" "Bitter almonds," Marcus replied simply, his tone holding no triumph, no satisfaction, just the weariness of someone who'd seen too much too young. "Cyanide smells like bitter almonds." I learned that from a medical textbook I found in the Columbia University dumpster, page 847, chapter on common poisons and their identification. My mom used to say knowledge was the only thing they couldn't take from poor people, the only wealth that didn't depend on bank accounts. Your mother, Blackstone began, then stopped, the words catching in his throat like they had physical weight. Sarah Thompson. She died 4 years ago because she couldn't afford insulin. Your company raised the price from $50 to $275 per vial in 18 months. She needed 3 vials a month to live. She made $1,200 monthly, working 3 jobs, 20 hours a day of cleaning your offices, serving your food, washing your dishes. After rent, there wasn't enough for both food and medicine. So she chose to feed me instead of treating herself. Marcus pulled out a photograph from his pocket, the edges soft from years of handling, the image faded but still clear, a young black woman with Marcus's eyes and his determination, smiling despite exhaustion visible in every line of her face. She went into diabetic ketoacidosis on a Tuesday. I called 911. They stabilized her the legal minimum, then discharged her when they found out she had no insurance. She died that night in our apartment, holding my hand, making me promise not to become a monster just because monsters exist, making me promise to be better than the world that killed her. The silence that followed was complete, absolute, the kind of silence that exists in the space between heartbeats, between confession and absolution, between sin and redemption. Every phone in the restaurant was recording, live streaming this moment to a world that was about to change. Why? Blackstone asked, and for the first time in decades, perhaps the first time since he'd been a child himself, his voice held genuine confusion rather than calculated inquiry. Why save me? After what I've done? After what my company did to your mother? You could have let me die. You should have let me die. Marcus looked at him with eyes that held too much wisdom for 12 years, eyes that had seen death and chosen life anyway, because every life has value, Mr. Blackstone, even yours. Even the life of someone who thinks poor people deserve to die for the crime of being poor. That's what makes me different from you. I see humanity where you see dollar signs. I see souls where you see statistics. I see someone's father, someone's son, even if they've forgotten how to be those things themselves. The paramedics arrived then, followed by what seemed like every law enforcement agency in New York. The FBI took over the scene, having been tracking James Chen's corporate espionage for months without knowing it would escalate to attempted murder. The restaurant became a crime scene, but the real crime, the one nobody would be prosecuted for, was written in Marcus's hollow cheeks and his mother's absence from the world. Dr. Mitchell approached Marcus with a clean towel for his nose and a bottle of water. You have remarkable knowledge of chemistry for someone your age. Have you thought about what you want to be when you grow up? Alive, Marcus answered honestly, then added, and maybe a doctor, if surviving allows for dreams. But medical school costs more than my grandmother and I will see in 10 lifetimes. Your grandmother? Eleanor Thompson. She has Alzheimer's. Doesn't remember me most days, calls me by my mother's name or doesn't see me at all. But I remember her, and I remember for her. And that's what love is, choosing to hold someone's memory when they can't hold it themselves. Blackstone had been listening, and something was breaking inside him with almost audible cracks, like ice in spring. The insulin prices, he said suddenly, the words escaping before his usual corporate filters could stop them. Your mother died because of the insulin prices my company set. Lots of mothers did, Marcus replied without accusation, just stating fact like reading from one of his memorized textbooks. Fathers, too. Children. Grandparents. Your company made $15 billion in profit last year. Those weren't numbers on a spreadsheet, Mr. Blackstone. Those were people. Each percentage point of profit was built on someone's suffering. Each stock increase was paid for in someone's death. I need to sit down, Blackstone said, and he did, right there on the floor beside the poisoned wine, his expensive suit soaking up the evidence of how close he'd come to being a victim himself. I need to think. I need to understand how I became this. Antoine, the manager, approached Marcus hesitantly, his earlier arrogance replaced by something that might have been shame if it had time to fully develop. Young man, I owe you an apology. I kicked you. I called you. Things that should never be said about another human being. You called me what you saw, Marcus said simply without bitterness, just exhausted acceptance. A poor black kid in torn clothes who didn't belong in your world. That's all anyone ever sees. Nobody sees the person inside the poverty. Nobody saw my mother as she worked herself to death trying to keep me alive. Nobody sees my grandmother, brilliant and forgotten. Nobody sees me memorizing medical books by streetlight because I promised my mom I'd become something more than our circumstances. Sarah Martinez from the Washington Post had been recording everything from her table since Marcus first entered. She approached now, her journalist instincts warring with her human sympathy. "Marcus, can I interview you? The world needs to hear your story." "Not my story," Marcus corrected. "My mother's story. My grandmother's story. The story of everyone who dies because medicine became a business instead of a calling. The story of everyone who could have been saved if profit wasn't more important than people." Within an hour, the video was everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, every platform carrying the image of this 12-year-old boy standing bloodied but unbowed, explaining with devastating simplicity how capitalism had killed his mother, and he'd still chosen to save its greatest beneficiary. The hashtag number Homeless Hero Marcus exploded across social media, but Marcus didn't know that yet. He was sitting at Blackstone's table now, finally accepting the seat he'd been offered, though he looked ready to run at any moment, like a wild animal that had learned that kindness was often a trap. "Tell me about your mother," Blackstone said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name, perhaps the first stirring of conscience in decades, perhaps just shock, perhaps the beginning of a transformation that would either destroy or redeem him. "Why do you want to know?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious rather than challenging. "Because I need to understand who I killed. Because I need to know what I've become. Because a 12-year-old boy just showed more humanity in 5 minutes than I've shown in 62 years, and I need to understand how that's possible." Marcus looked at the photograph in his hands, his mother's smile unchanged by time or handling. Her name was Sarah Louise Thompson. She was born in the Bronx, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs just like she would. She was brilliant, full scholarship to City College, studying to be a teacher before she got pregnant with me. Everyone told her to have an abortion or give me up for adoption, said I'd ruin her life, trap her in poverty forever. He traced his mother's face with one finger, gentle as prayer. But she said I was her miracle, said I was proof that beautiful things could grow in difficult soil. She dropped out of college to raise me, took whatever job she could find. Cleaning hotels, washing dishes, mopping floors, nothing was beneath her if it meant I could eat, if it meant I could go to school, if it meant I might have a chance at the life she'd lost. The restaurant had gone completely quiet. Even the police had stopped their investigation to listen to this child speak with the eloquence of someone who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who'd learned that words were weapons the poor could sometimes wield against the powerful. She was diagnosed with diabetes when I was 5. Type 1, the kind that's nobody's fault, just bad genetic luck. The insulin was expensive but manageable at first. She'd skip meals to afford it, wear the same shoes until they fell apart, never buy anything for herself. Everything was for me or for medicine. Then your company bought the patent. Blackstone flinched as if struck. First year, you raised the price to $100 per vial. She started rationing, taking half doses, checking her blood sugar less often to save test strips. Second year, $175. She started skipping doses entirely, only taking insulin when she felt really sick. Third year, $275. She stopped taking it altogether. Marcus's voice never wavered, but tears were running down his cheeks now, mixing with the blood from his nose. She tried to hide it from me, said she was managing with diet and exercise. I was 8. I didn't know what ketoacidosis looked like, didn't know that her breath smelling like fruit meant her body was eating itself. Didn't know that her weight loss wasn't from a diet but from her muscles being consumed for fuel. Not until I found her unconscious on our bathroom floor. He looked directly at Blackstone, and the billionaire couldn't look away, caught by the terrible gravity of this child's grief. I called 911. They came fast, faster than they'd ever come to our neighborhood before. But when they found out she didn't have insurance, they just gave her the minimum treatment required by law. Stabilized her enough that she wouldn't die in the ambulance, then discharged her. Told us to come back when we could pay, as if we could ever pay. As if poverty was a choice we'd made rather than a trap we'd been born into. The photograph trembled in Marcus's hands. She died that night, in our apartment that smelled like mold and desperation, holding my hand, apologizing for leaving me, making me promise to be better than the world that killed her. Her last words were, "Don't become a monster to fight monsters, baby. Become an angel. That's how we win." And then she was gone, and I was alone, and I was 8 years old planning my mother's funeral with money we didn't have. Blackstone was crying now, silent tears that he didn't bother to wipe away. The billionaire who hadn't cried at 3 divorces, who hadn't cried when his own father died, was crying for a woman he'd never met but had killed as surely as if he'd injected the poison himself. "How?" he whispered. "How can you not hate me? How can you sit here, having saved my life, and not hate me with every fiber of your being?" "Because hate would make me like you," Marcus replied simply. "And my mother deserved better than that. She deserved a son who chose love even when the world chose greed, who chose mercy even when shown none, who chose to see humanity in everyone, even those who'd forgotten they were human. That's how I honor her, by being everything you forgot how to be." Dr. Mitchell had been listening, and now he spoke up. "Marcus, have you ever been tested? Academically, I mean?" "Once. A substitute teacher saw me doing calculus during lunch. She had me take some test. Said I scored 165, but that didn't matter because genius doesn't pay rent and intelligence doesn't buy insulin." "You taught yourself calculus?" "And chemistry, biology, anatomy, pharmacology. Books don't care if you're poor, Dr. Mitchell. They teach anyone willing to learn. The library throws out old textbooks. Universities dump previous editions when new ones come out. I read everything I can find, memorize what might be useful. Knowledge is the only thing they can't take from us. They can take our homes, our health, our dignity, but they can't take what we know. With your intelligence, you could get scholarships. To where? Harvard? Yale? With what address? With what transcripts? I miss school 3 days a week to take care of my grandmother, or because I don't have clean clothes, or because I'm too hungry to concentrate. Genius doesn't overcome systemic poverty, doctor. It just makes you more aware of everything you'll never have." Blackstone stood up suddenly, pulling out his phone. "Martha? Yes, I know what time at Island. Call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. No, not Monday, tomorrow. Saturday. I don't care if they're golfing or sailing or counting their money. We're restructuring our insulin pricing immediately." The restaurant held its breath. Mr. Blackstone, one of his lawyers, started. The shareholders. "I am the majority shareholder," Blackstone cut him off. "I own 51% of the company. I decide. And I've decided that insulin will be capped at $30 per vial, effective immediately. Any board member who objects can sell their shares to me at market price." He looked at Marcus. "That won't bring your mother back." "No," Marcus agreed quietly. "But it might save someone else's mother. That's all we can do, save the next one, and the next one, and the one after that, until saving people becomes more normal than letting them die." The restaurant erupted first in whispers, then in applause. Marcus didn't acknowledge it. He was looking at his mother's picture, whispering something too quiet for anyone else to hear. Perhaps a promise, perhaps a prayer, perhaps just telling her that her death had finally meant something. Sarah Martinez approached again. "Marcus, please, let me tell your story. Not for fame, but for change. The world needs to know what happened here tonight." Marcus considered, then nodded slowly. "But don't make me the hero. Heroes are extraordinary, and what I did should be ordinary. Any person seeing another in danger should help, regardless of who they are, regardless of past harm. Make this about the system that killed my mother. Make it about all the mothers and fathers and children still dying. Make it about change." Within 3 hours, the video had been viewed 50 million times. The GoFundMe someone started hit $1 million in 30 minutes, 5 million in an hour. But Marcus didn't know any of that yet. He was exhausted, the adrenaline finally fading, leaving him aware of his injuries, the broken nose, the bruised ribs, the cut on his cheek that would add another scar to his collection. "Where will you sleep tonight?" Dr. Mitchell asked gently. "Same place as always. The overpass on 142nd. My grandmother's probably confused about where I am. She doesn't remember much, but she knows when I'm gone too long." "Absolutely not," Blackstone said firmly. "You saved my life. You're not spending another night on the streets. I have a guest house." "I don't want your charity," Marcus interrupted, but without heat, just tired. "It's not charity. I don't know what to call it. The beginning of an apology that will take the rest of my life to complete? Please, just for tonight. Your grandmother needs proper shelter. You need medical attention. Let me do this one small thing." Marcus looked at him for a long moment, seeing something in the billionaire's face that hadn't been there an hour ago, maybe humanity, Maybe shame, maybe just the shock of realizing how close he'd come to death and who had saved him. One night, Marcus finally agreed. For my grandmother. The cold makes her arthritis worse, and rain is coming. As they prepared to leave, the entire restaurant stood and applauded not the polite, restrained applause of the wealthy, but something raw and genuine. Acknowledging that they'd witnessed something extraordinary, Marcus didn't wave or smile. He just walked out, his bare feet leaving bloody footprints on the marble, still holding his mother's picture. The next morning, America woke to a changed world. The video of Marcus saving Blackstone was the lead story on every network. The president tweeted about it. Celebrities shared it with messages about healthcare reform. But more importantly, people began sharing their own stories, parents who'd rationed insulin, children who'd watched loved ones die from preventable diseases, families destroyed by medical debt. Blackstone kept his word. At the emergency board meeting, held at 7 a.m. on a Saturday, he didn't just lower insulin prices, he restructured the entire company philosophy. Any life-saving medication would be capped at a 20% profit margin. The board members who objected were bought out at market price. The stock plummeted 40% in Monday's opening, but Blackstone didn't care. "I've been dead for decades," he told the press. "That boy didn't just save my life, he showed me I had a life worth saving. Every dollar of profit built on suffering is a dollar stolen from our own humanity." The FBI investigation revealed that James Chen had been planning the murder for months, bribing Derek with money Derek desperately needed for his mother's cancer treatment, another tragic irony in a story full of them. Chen was arrested at JFK Airport, his passport and a suitcase full of cash, suggesting he'd known the plan might fail. He was charged with attempted murder and conspiracy, facing 25 to life. Marcus and his grandmother were moved into a small apartment, not Blackstone's guest house, which Marcus had refused after that first night, but a modest two-bedroom in a safe neighborhood. The rent was paid by the GoFundMe, which had now reached $8 million. Marcus tried to refuse it, but Dr. Mitchell convinced him it wasn't charity but investment. "Every dollar spent keeping you housed and fed is a dollar invested in the thousands of people you'll help when you become a doctor," Mitchell explained. "This isn't about you, Marcus. It's about everyone you'll save." Eleanor Thompson was placed in a quality memory care facility, where she received proper treatment for her Alzheimer's. On good days, she recognized Marcus and called him by his name, telling him stories about his mother as a child. On bad days, she called him Sarah and worried about making rent. Marcus answered to both names, held her hand through both realities. 3 weeks after the restaurant incident, Marcus was called to testify before Congress about drug pricing. At 12 years old, he stood before some of the most powerful people in America and spoke truth to power with the clarity of someone who had nothing left to lose. "My mother's name was Sarah Thompson," he began, his young voice echoing through the chamber. "She died at 28 because insulin cost more than she could afford. She wasn't a statistic or a market demographic or an acceptable loss in capitalism's calculations. She was a person who sang off-key in the shower and cried at dog food commercials and made the best grilled cheese sandwiches, even when that was all we could afford to eat." He held up her photograph for the C-SPAN cameras. "Every person who dies from rationing insulin has a story like hers. Every death is preventable. Every death is a choice made by companies that see medicine as a product rather than a right. You have the power to change this. The question is whether you have the courage." The Marcus Thompson Act was introduced the next day, proposing caps on all life-saving medications. The pharmaceutical lobby fought it viciously, spending hundreds of millions on attack ads and campaign contributions. But the public pressure was overwhelming. The image of Marcus, bloodied and dignified, standing in that restaurant had become iconic. The story of his mother's death had become America's story. 6 months later, the act passed, weakened by compromises and loopholes, but still revolutionary. Insulin was capped at $35 per vial, EpiPens at $50, antibiotics at reasonable prices. It wasn't everything advocates wanted, but it was a beginning. Blackstone testified in support of the bill, a move that made him a pariah in pharmaceutical circles but a hero to millions of Americans. His fortune evaporated as other companies retaliated, as investors fled, as the empire he'd built on suffering crumbled. He didn't care. "Money is just paper with pretensions," he said in an interview. "I spent 60 years accumulating paper while people died for lack of medicine. Marcus Thompson showed me that the only wealth worth having is the knowledge that you've helped rather than harmed." Marcus started at Columbia at age 13, the youngest medical student in the university's history. The transition was brutal, not academically, as he'd already taught himself most of the material, but socially. He was a child among adults, carrying trauma that made him seem ancient, wearing poverty like a visible mark even in new clothes. Dr. Mitchell became more than a mentor, he became the father Marcus had never had. Mitchell and his wife, unable to have children of their own, didn't try to replace Marcus's mother, but they gave him something he'd never experienced: stability, regular meals, a bedroom that was just his, adults who came home every night and asked about his day. The restaurant, Le Jardin, closed within a month of the incident. The viral video had shown not just Marcus's heroism, but the staff's cruelty, the diner's mockery, the casual racism that had almost let a man die because the warning came from the wrong color child. Antoine Dubois was fired immediately and became unhireable in the restaurant industry. He ended up working at a food bank in the Bronx, serving the very people he'd once despised, a redemption arc that Marcus, had he known, might have appreciated. Trevor Walsh, the security guard who'd brutalized Marcus, was arrested 2 months later for assault on another homeless person. This time, there were cameras. This time, there were consequences. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, where he learned what it felt like to be powerless, to be at the mercy of those stronger and crueler. 3 years passed. Marcus grew taller, his voice deepened, but his eyes retained that same too-old wisdom that made professors forget they were teaching a teenager. He excelled in his studies, particularly in pharmacology and toxicology. His professors joked that he could identify poisons by smell alone, not knowing how literally true that was. On the 3rd anniversary of the restaurant incident, Blackstone invited Marcus to dinner. Not at a fancy restaurant, but at a small Caribbean place in Marcus's old neighborhood, where the owner knew him by name and still sometimes tried to feed him for free. "I need to tell you something," Blackstone said. He looked older, grayer, but somehow more alive than he'd been as a billionaire. His suits were off the rack now, his watch a simple Timex, but his eyes had lost that calculating coldness that had once defined him. "I've been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors give me 3 months, maybe 6 if I'm lucky." Marcus set down his fork, genuinely saddened. Despite everything, he'd grown to respect the man Blackstone had become, if not the man he'd been. "I'm sorry," Marcus said simply. "Don't be. I've had 3 years I shouldn't have had. 3 years to try to make amends for 62 years of harm. I've given away most of what was left of my fortune. Set up clinics in underserved areas, funded research into affordable medications. It doesn't undo the damage, but maybe it balances the scales slightly." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm leaving what remains to your foundation." "I don't have a foundation." "You will. The Marcus and Sarah Thompson Foundation for Medical Access. It will have $2 billion to start money I've clawed back from various investments and holdings. Use it to make sure no mother dies like yours did. No child suffers like you did. No family chooses between food and medicine." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing this. "She would have forgiven you, you know. My mother. She forgave everyone." Said holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Ironic, considering I was literally almost poisoned. They both laughed, a strange sound given the circumstances, but somehow appropriate. "I have something else to tell you," Blackstone continued. "I've had investigators looking into your family history. Your grandmother, Eleanor, she wasn't always poor. She wasn't always forgotten." Marcus leaned forward, suddenly alert. "Your grandmother is Dr. Eleanor Thompson. She won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1985 for her work on synthetic insulin production. She developed the process that made mass production possible, that should have made insulin affordable for everyone. She donated all her patents to the public domain, saying medicine should belong to humanity, not corporations." Marcus felt the world tilt. His grandmother, who couldn't remember his name most days, had been a Nobel laureate? After her daughter, your mother, died, and with her dementia advancing, everyone forgot who she was. But I found the records. There's more. There was a trust fund, set up by her colleagues for her family. $500 million. It was stolen by a lawyer after your mother's death, hidden in offshore accounts. I've recovered it. It's yours by right." "I don't want it," Marcus said immediately. "It's not mine to give or yours to refuse. It's your inheritance, stolen and now returned. Use it to finish what your grandmother started, what your mother died for, what you've been fighting for since you were 8 years old. Marcus looked out the window at the street where he'd once hunted for bottles to recycle, where his mother had collapsed that final time, where he'd learned that being poor meant being invisible until you were useful to the rich. "Okay," he said finally, "but not for me. For them, for everyone still out there, rationing insulin, choosing between food and medicine, dying because healing has a price tag." Blackstone died 2 months later, sooner than the doctors had predicted, but peacefully, in his sleep, in the modest apartment he'd moved to after selling his mansion. Marcus spoke at his funeral, one of only a dozen people who attended. The man who'd once commanded armies of lawyers and lobbyists, who'd had senators on speed dial and judges in his pocket, died almost alone. Richard Blackstone was two people, Marcus said in his eulogy. The first was a monster who built an empire on suffering, who saw human beings as market opportunities, who transformed medicine from a calling into a business. That man deserves no mourning. But the second Richard Blackstone, the one who emerged that night in the restaurant, was someone else entirely. He was a man who realized the magnitude of his sins and spent his remaining years trying to atone. He was proof that redemption is possible, that people can change, that it's never too late to choose humanity over profit. Marcus paused, looking at the sparse gathering. "I choose to remember the second man, not because he deserves it, but because if we can't believe in redemption, then we can't believe in change. And change is the only thing that makes any of this bearable." By age 18, Marcus had graduated from medical school, the youngest doctor in American history. He opened his first clinic in East Harlem, 3 blocks from the overpass where he'd once slept. Everything was free for those who couldn't pay insulin, antibiotics, checkups, surgery if needed. The walls were covered with photographs, his mother, his grandmother in her Nobel Prize ceremony, and surprisingly, one of Blackstone. Not the billionaire in his expensive suit, but the broken man on the restaurant floor, realizing what he'd become. "Why keep his picture?" a colleague asked once. "To remember that everyone is capable of change," Marcus replied, "and to remind myself what I could become if I ever forget why I'm doing this." The clinic treated hundreds of patients in its first month, thousands in its first year. Marcus worked 18-hour days, seeing anyone who came through the doors. He had a special gift for diagnosing difficult cases, for catching things other doctors missed. Some called it genius. Marcus knew it was just the hypervigilance of someone who'd learned young that missing small details could mean death. On the 5th anniversary of the restaurant incident, Marcus was invited to the White House. The president was awarding him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the youngest recipient in history. Marcus almost didn't go, it was his grandmother's birthday, and even though she no longer recognized anyone, he always spent it with her. Dr. Mitchell convinced him. "She'd want you to go. Your grandmother spent her life fighting for this. Let her see her grandson honored for continuing her work." So Marcus went, but he brought Eleanor with him. She sat in her wheelchair, confused but calm, while the president spoke about courage and compassion and the power of a single person to change the world. Marcus Thompson, the president said, reminded us that heroism isn't about wearing a cape or having superpowers. It's about choosing to help even those who've hurt us. It's about seeing humanity in everyone, even those who refuse to see it in us. At 12 years old, he showed more courage than most of us will show in a lifetime. When they pinned the medal on Marcus, Eleanor suddenly spoke clear and lucid for just a moment, the fog of Alzheimer's lifting like morning mist. "Sarah would be so proud," she said, touching Marcus's face with a trembling hand. "My grandson, the doctor, the healer, the one who chose love over hate." Then the moment passed, and she was gone again, back into the maze of her disease. But Marcus held on to those words, treasured them, repeated them to himself, on the days when the weight of trying to fix a broken system felt unbearable. The Marcus and Sarah Thompson Foundation grew into one of the largest medical charities in the world. Every year, it provided free insulin to millions of people, funded research into affordable treatments, lobbied for healthcare reform. It did what Eleanor had dreamed of, what Sarah had died for, what Marcus had promised. But the work was never just about medicine. It was about changing how America saw poverty, illness, and human worth. Marcus testified before Congress 17 more times over the years, each time wearing his mother's picture pinned to his lapel. He spoke at medical schools, challenging future doctors to see patients as people, not problems to be solved or bills to be paid. "You will be tempted," he would tell them, "to see the poor as responsible for their poverty, the sick as burdens on the system, the difficult patients as unworthy of your time. When that happens, remember that every patient is someone's mother, father, child. Every person who walks through your door is fighting battles you know nothing about. Your job isn't to judge their worthiness, it's to heal. At 25, Marcus had treated tens of thousands of patients, many for free. He'd developed a new form of synthetic insulin that cost pennies to produce, though pharmaceutical companies fought viciously to prevent its approval. He'd written papers on the intersection of poverty and health that became required reading in medical schools. He'd become, despite his best efforts to avoid it, famous. But fame meant nothing to him compared to the small victories. The diabetic child who could afford insulin for the first time. The mother who didn't have to choose between medicine and rent. The grandfather who lived to see his grandchildren graduate because medication was finally affordable. One cold February night, exactly 13 years after the restaurant incident, Marcus was walking past the spot where Les Jardins had stood. It was a community health center now, one he'd funded, providing free health care to anyone who walked through its doors. As he passed, he saw a young boy digging through the trash, movements practiced and efficient. The boy was maybe 10, Latino, wearing clothes too thin for the weather. Marcus watched him pocket a half-eaten sandwich, saw the same desperate efficiency he'd once employed, the same hunger he'd once known. "Hungry?" Marcus asked gently, approaching slowly so as not to startle the child. The boy jumped, ready to run, then froze. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Dr. Marcus Thompson. His picture was on the clinic walls, on the sides of buses promoting free healthcare programs. You're him," the boy stammered, "the doctor who was homeless." "I was," Marcus confirmed. "Now I'm just a doctor who remembers being homeless. What's your name?" "Miguel." "Well, Miguel, how about we get you a proper meal, and maybe we can talk about why you're out here alone?" As they walked to a nearby diner, the same one where Marcus used to stare through the windows, watching people eat, Miguel told his story. His mother had lupus. His father had been deported. He was trying to help however he could, collecting bottles, doing odd jobs, anything to contribute to the medication costs. Marcus listened, seeing himself in this child, seeing the cycle that continued despite all the changes, all the laws, all the progress. "Miguel," he said as they sat down, "what do you want to be when you grow up?" "Alive," the boy answered honestly, then added quietly, "Maybe a doctor like you, but that's impossible for someone like me." "I thought the same thing when I was your age," Marcus said. "Let me tell you, a secret impossible is just a word people use when they've given up. You want to be a doctor? Then you'll be a doctor. But first, let's get your mother some help. Real help. Then we'll talk about your future." He made a call. Within an hour, Miguel's mother had an appointment at the clinic. Her medications would be provided free, and Miguel had a scholarship to a private school that Marcus's foundation supported. Years later, when Dr. Miguel Rodriguez graduated from medical school, his education funded entirely by the Thompson Foundation, he told the story of the night he met Marcus Thompson. How a chance encounter with someone who'd walked his path had changed everything. "Dr. Thompson taught me that we don't rise despite our circumstances," Miguel said in his valedictorian speech. "We rise because of them, because they teach us empathy, they show us suffering. They make us determined to ensure no one else goes through what we did." Marcus was in the audience, crying openly. He thought of his mother, dead at 28, his grandmother, brilliant and forgotten until he'd restored her legacy, Blackstone, redeemed too late but redeemed nonetheless, all the paths that had led to this moment. After the ceremony, Miguel found him. "Thank you," he said simply. "Don't thank me," Marcus replied. "Pay it forward. Find the next scared kid digging through trash. Show them they matter. That's how we change the world, one saved life at a time." Today, there's a statue in Central Park. Not of Marcus, he refused that honor despite repeated requests, but of a nameless child reaching up to help a falling man. The plaque reads, "Every life has value. Every choice has power. Every person can be both saved and savior. In memory of Sarah Thompson and all who died for lack of care." Tourists often ask about it. New Yorkers know the story. They tell it to their children, this tale of a barefoot boy who saved his mother's killer, who chose mercy over revenge, who proved that courage isn't about strength, but about doing what's right when it would be easier to do nothing. Marcus, now 37, still practices medicine. He still lives modestly in a 2-bedroom apartment in Harlem, the same neighborhood where he once slept on streets. He still visits his grandmother every day at the memory care facility, though she passed away 5 years ago. He sits by her grave, tells her about the patients he's saved, the changes in healthcare, the world she helped create even if she couldn't remember it. The Thompson Foundation has grown into a global organization, providing free healthcare in 17 countries. The synthetic insulin Marcus developed is now the standard treatment worldwide, saving millions of lives annually. The Marcus Thompson Act has been expanded 4 times, each iteration covering more medications, more conditions, more people. But Marcus doesn't think about his legacy. He thinks about the next patient, the next child in an alley, the next mother choosing between medicine and rent. The work is never done. The system, though improved, still fails too many. But it's better than it was, and it will be better tomorrow than it is today. Sometimes young activists reach out to him, angry about injustice, wanting to tear down systems, burn it all and start over. He understands their rage. He felt it every day in that alley. Every night his mother worked herself toward death. Every moment the world told him he was worthless. But rage only destroys, he tells them. Love builds, mercy transforms, compassion converts enemies into allies. I'm not saying don't be angry, anger is fuel. But choose what you do with that fuel carefully. You can burn everything down, or you can forge something better. He still carries his mother's photograph, now laminated and worn soft from years of handling. On the back, in her handwriting, faded but still visible, "My miracle boy. Be better than this world deserves." Have you ever wondered what happens when we choose love over justified hatred? Marcus Thompson is your answer. Share his story not because it's extraordinary, but because it shouldn't be. Every day, we face choices between compassion and indifference, between helping and walking away. Every day, we can be Marcus Thompson in our own small ways. The question is, will we? When you see injustice, will you speak up? When you witness cruelty, will you intervene? When you have the chance to help someone who's hurt you, will you take it? The world changes not through grand gestures but through individual choices, accumulated over time like compound interest on humanity's debt to itself. Make yours count. Share this story. Start conversations. Demand better from systems that fail the vulnerable. Be the person who sees humanity in everyone, even those who've forgotten they're human. Because somewhere right now, there's a child going hungry, a parent rationing medicine, a family choosing between food and healthcare. They don't need our pity. They need our action. They need us to be Marcus Thompson in our own stories. Today, before you scroll to the next thing, before you forget this story, do something. Donate to a free clinic. Write to your representative about drug prices. Volunteer at a shelter. Stand up to prejudice. Choose mercy over judgment. Transform your anger into action. The world is waiting for heroes. It's waiting for you.